And we're back. For those of you just joining us, welcome to the Power is Now Real Estate Roundtable. What I love about the Real Estate Roundtable is that it's a discussion for real estate professionals about the real estate business. And folks, we cover it all here, from REO to commercial to residential real estate, and the strategies to buy or sell real estate, to invest in real estate. All of that is happening right here on the Power is Now Real Estate Roundtable. With me today is the fabulous Brandy Nelson, who is the executive director of REOBroker.com. You should check out that organization for more opportunities if you're in the default space. And she's also a real estate broker out in the Palm Desert area. And also Steve Rivkin, all the way from Connecticut, is in the house. Now, Steve mentioned that is the place of the greatest pizza. I think Chicago might argue with him. But in spite of that, he's with us today. And we thank you both for being a part of the show. And Darren, I really appreciate your time today to talk about these very, very important topics. And so we're now talking about foreclosures. And can you give us kind of an overview of what your thoughts are about the foreclosures that are happening across the country?
Yes, I mean, coming out of the pandemic or in the middle of the pandemic, to be honest, we believe there was a good chance that there could be a pretty big wave of foreclosures hitting as a result of the economic shock that was experienced during the pandemic. I think it's fair to say now, a couple of years later, that is definitely not materialized. And I do have, and I don't think it is at least directly because of the pandemic going to materialize. But I do have some slides that illustrate how this has played out and then where we think this is going in the future. All right, so this is actually auction.com data, and we account for about 50% of all foreclosure auctions nationwide, 40 to 50%. So I think it's pretty indicative of what's going on across the country, and we're nationwide. So when you look at the left-hand side here, this is the number of properties that are actually going to foreclosure auction and being auctioned off, either selling to a third party or going back to the bank as an REO. And everything there is relative to our 2019 levels. So I use 2019 as a benchmark of normal levels of foreclosure auction volume. And if you look at these properties brought to auction, those are running, and in fact, this goes through December of 2023. December, it dropped to 33% of those 2019 levels. It was running around 40 to 50% for most of the year. But needless to say, we are at basically 40 to 50% or 50 to 60% below 2019 levels when it comes to these foreclosures brought to auction. The yellow line there is scheduled auctions. Those are auctions that are scheduled but may not actually take place. Those are running a little bit higher, but we're seeing a higher cancellation rate. More of the auctions are being canceled. So that's what's happening there. And then a similar story on the REO side. These are, again, auction.com specific, but I think this applies to the market as a whole. But our volumes are running at about 30 to 40% of pre-pandemic or 2019 levels when it comes to REO auctions. So there's no doubt that not only did a huge wave of distress not materialize, we didn't see any increase at all. I mean, we definitely saw an increase off of the record lows during the pandemic, as you can see there, but we're still running, and this seems to be the new normal, is this very muted lower level of foreclosures. And to put it in context, 2019 was a very low level of foreclosures compared to, say, 2008, 2009. And so that's what we're seeing right now. I will show real quick here another slide that shows it does vary a little bit by state. The green states here, this is as of the fourth quarter of 23, are where we're seeing foreclosure volume emerge more quickly. And in fact, in some states, it is where it's over 100%, means it's above 2019 levels. So you do tend to see that more in the Rust Belt and Midwest, but in the Northeast and Southeast, you're seeing the darker blue indicates that foreclosure volumes are still very muted relative to their 2019 levels.
Well, I think it's significant to note you're using 2019 as a benchmark. And what is significant about 2019 versus maybe 2013 is when I saw the kind of the fall off of REO.
Yeah, I think we just wanted to benchmark it to, okay, here's what we were seeing as kind of this normal market. And 2018 was a very, I would say, healthy, for the most part, housing market, as close to normal housing market that you could be in. And so we just wanted to benchmark back to there. We could benchmark back. It is somewhat arbitrary. We could benchmark back to different points in the history, but we chose 2019.
So, Darren, what are the reasons why we didn't see the avalanche of foreclosures? What took place? I mean, I know our unemployment is low, but how unemployment numbers are calculated versus what we actually see and feel and know about are two different things. In fact, we also know that income levels, what people are earning, it's not keeping up with inflation. And then there are other signs like student loan debt, consumer debt, and other things. So why aren't we seeing more foreclosures? How are people holding on?
So I think, yeah, there's a variety of reasons. Number one, I don't want to make this sound like I'm being dismissive, but the pandemic, in terms of economic shock, the pandemic was relatively short-lived. And there, if you look at the unemployment rate, it spiked very high, but it was for a very short period of time that it was so high. So that's number one. One of the reasons it was relatively short-lived is there was massive amounts of government stimulus thrown at thrown at it in an effort to mute the economic shock, and so I think that's a huge reason. That includes at the housing market. There's many examples of that. One of the main ones I look at is a homeowner assistance fund, $10 billion given to as grants to homeowners who are in distress. So that's, that stimulus piece is part of it. And then on top of that, you have also unprecedented foreclosure prevention policies put in place, including forbearance and a foreclosure moratorium for, I think it was a period of about 18 months, maybe not quite that long, that really kept the avalanche from getting rolling in the first place. And many of those foreclosure prevention policies have continued, at least in some form, even past the pandemic. And so that we have a new world that we live in terms of the loss mitigation and the forbearance that's being thrown at these distressed homeowners to try to help them stay in the home, is another big reason for why we're seeing these muted levels of foreclosure activity.
So I know many of the homeowners were given forbearance, and some of them were given extensions. They were putting the balance of the loan on the back end, making them 40-year loans. But some of them now are getting to the point where that money is due. Are you seeing that there is going to be a problem when those forbearance and all those prevention has been dried up?
Yes, one thing that we're noticing, if we especially look at FHA loan data where this is available, there has been this rise over the last few months in loss mitigation failures. And so what that means is folks have gotten some form of loss mitigation, like a longer term or some kind of loan modification, and they're coming out of that and they're still going delinquent. So they're failing that, and that has been on the increase. And so I think there are some signs that for a lot of people, those loss mitigation efforts helped, and it's going to help them stay in the home permanently. But there is a segment that it just unfortunately prolonged the inevitable, and we're seeing some signs of that in the increasing loss mitigation failures, and we're hearing that anecdotally from our clients as well. But that said, the government continues to throw new ideas out there to try to keep these homeowners in their homes. And so the most recent one being the payment supplement from the FHA that actually uses the partial claim mechanism that FHA has to supplement the payment that the borrower is making up to 25% of that payment. And that can last for up to 3 years. So even though we are seeing this increase, in loss mitigation failures, there's nothing pointing to, a massive, and not that you're asking this, Brandy, but nothing pointing to a massive increase in foreclosure volumes, at least in the near future.
That makes sense. And the other question is, we keep hearing about the zombie foreclosures. Can you touch on that? Explain how that even came up? Where is this supposed zombie foreclosures? Can you explain that?
Yeah, that's interesting because it's a phrase I remember a lot being bandied about during the last crisis.
Correct.
And that was more these properties that, because of the foreclosure prevention efforts and delays for different reasons, there were properties that ended up just sitting vacant for a long period of time. The people had given up on the loans and left, but the banks were not foreclosing for one reason or another. I think in this context, I think there are some of these properties that are sitting around. Maybe the most there's not a huge number of them, but the biggest segment of them would potentially be in, or at least proportionally, in the reverse mortgage space, properties, because there's been really a hesitancy to foreclose on these reverse mortgages, just because of the situation, and dealing with elderly homeowners who are already vulnerable. So that's maybe a pocket I see of these zombie foreclosures, but I'm not seeing a lot of evidence of that. One thing I did want to talk about that I think relates, and maybe we can talk about in a second, is what we're seeing happening is a lot of these homeowners, given more and more time to avoid foreclosure, are finally deciding, okay, I'll just sell the house.
Right.
And these, what we call the pre-foreclosure sales. If we take pre-foreclosure sales and then foreclosure auction sales and then REO sales all together as a total distressed market, if we consider those distressed sales, pre-foreclosure sales now account for about 60% of all distressed sales. Whereas before the pandemic, it was more like about a third, 35% of all distressed sales. And so that's a big shift, I think, is that given this more and more time, these homeowners, and I think this is honestly the hope of some of the government policies, is that if you just give these homeowners more time, they'll finally make the decision, I'm going to sell this property without being forced to sell the property. And we can also talk about this if we want to, but those pre-foreclosure sales are where I see potentially opportunity for agents who have operated in REO world for a long time.
Thank you for saying that, because I think that is a huge segment that I've also been telling my members about, is the pre-foreclosures, and that there is a huge opportunity. That's what I'm seeing there.
Awesome.
We're going to talk about that opportunity, maybe even with auction.com. And but before we transition there, Steve, did you have any questions for Darren?
Thank you for speaking about the zombie foreclosures. I don't know if the empty houses will all be occupied by the sellers who realize they have to sell their house, but when they go to move somewhere, they have nowhere to go but the zombie homes. So we'll have to watch that. But I guess in watching the commercial side of things, they're not quite at break point, but it seems like there's a storm brewing, and we're seeing changes in availability and cost to capital on commercial. How do you feel that's going to affect the residential REO and retail sales?
Yeah, I see that commercial as one of a list, a fairly short list of what I would call external factors to the residential real estate market that could, if it became big enough of a problem, could ripple out and affect negatively the residential real estate market. And we're definitely seeing signs of that. I would say it's a little bit lower on the list as a likelihood of rippling out to the residential real estate market right now, but it certainly could emerge as we see more of those, if and when we see more of those defaults happening on the commercial side. Another risk factor I see that was talked about, I think at NADP quite a bit, and some of the other conferences I've been at, is rising home insurance and property taxes. Could be one of those triggers that creates, an increase in delinquencies and defaults on the residential side. That's another one I'm looking at. I think recession is another one that's a little bit more obvious, of a risk factor that could trigger that. So, and there could be another, I almost hate to say it out loud, but there could be another pandemic or something like that we're not even thinking about that could trigger that. And so that I would put commercial market defaults on that list of possible risk factors in the next 12 to 18 months, kind of in the middle of a list of 10, maybe 10 factors.
Insurance is actually a huge crisis in a lot of areas right now, especially California and Florida. In fact, we just had somebody in the Bay Area. I'm in Palm Springs, so not my area, but one of my members, $18,000 for 1 year on their insurance, and they no longer can now afford the payment. They're going to let the house go. These type of things are happening and increasing where they cannot no longer afford their payment. And if they're doing PITI, and now all of a sudden their payment gets raised another $600 a month, and now they no longer can afford that mortgage payment.
Yeah, great point.
These are some incredible risk factors that you have identified. And Darren, for the sake of those who are watching and are listening, if you could just restate again and kind of the order of the factors that could lead to, greater foreclosure activities, particularly in areas that have been more vulnerable because of the economy or the density or whatever the factors are, more vulnerable to foreclosure than in other areas.
Yeah, I'd probably put, based on everything I've been looking at recently, I'd probably put that rising home insurance and property taxes at the top of the list as a potential risk factor of kind of a new, this is not really talking about the defaults that have the deferred defaults from the pandemic, but more of like potentially a new increase
Wave.
in defaults, new wave. I hate, I don't want to use the word wave too much, but a new emerging risk. And so I put that at the top of the list. I would say, it's tough to categorize them, but recession, I do think it's very likely we'll see at least a mild recession this year. And I know a lot of folks have been saying that for a long time, so it's hard to believe them. But some of the factors I look at indicate at least a mild recession this year, and that would result in an increase in defaults. I think the commercial defaults is on that list, maybe around 3 to 5. I think some kind of falling home prices is absent of necessarily any of these other risks, maybe just because of the affordability or rising inventory, we would see prices fall. And that could also trigger some defaults on folks who all of a sudden thought they had a lot of equity in their homes and maybe don't have as much equity. So that'd be my maybe short list of the top 5. I think I may name 5 there.
For those of you just joining us, we're talking to Darren Blomquist. He's a vice president of market economics at auction.com. And folks, we're in the final stage here of this interview, and it's been great so far. I've learned a lot, Darren. This has really been informative. When we come back, we're going to get his final thoughts on, what investors should do, what agents should think about doing given this information, what strategies should they employ, the opportunity at auction.com, all of that right here, right now on the Power is Now Real Estate Roundtable. We'll be right back.
The Power Is Now magazines are the leading resource for real estate agents, mortgage bankers, entrepreneurs, and small home ownership businesses, providing leaders with business strategy information, resources and tools through PIN, Real Estate, Programming Guide magazines. Stay up to the minute with real estate news and information from industry experts. Subscription is free. Sign up today. thepowerisnow.com. thepowerisnow.com.